Sure that I came out and that we shared and talk a little bit about my story, but also if the story means anything, what does it mean today? What does it mean for young people today? Because I joined the Panther Party very young, at 15 years old, and was surrounded. I was the youngest in the New York chapter and the youngest of the Panther 21, but I was surrounded by young activists. There were Panthers who were 17, 18, 19. The average age of a member of the Black Panther Party was 20 years old. And then we formed coalitions with Students for a Democratic Society and the Young Lords, which was a Puerto Rican political party, revolutionary party. And there was a group in New York called the Iwakun, which means the Harmonious Fist. There were groups all across the country. There were the Brown Berets. So I'll get into that conversation a little bit later, because two of the biggest misconceptions, and there were misconceptions for me when I first walked into the office of the Black Panther Party, was that the Panthers were a black power, if not a black hate group. And the second was that it was going to be all about the guns and the violence. You know, New York kind of famously, in Oakland, Bobby Seale and Huey Newton famously kind of burst on the national scene when they began patrolling the streets of Oakland with guns and with law books. And it was legal to carry guns in California at that time if they weren't concealed. And the law books were to say that we understand the law, and we'll read you the statutes about, you know, bearing arms. We'll also read you the statutes about, you know, not violating the person's rights that you're arrested. And no one had stood up that aggressively, but also that thoughtfully to make a statement against police brutality. And then what would happen is that if the person was arrested, and of course, you know, a video camera is a good way to kind of document what's going on and to get the police to calm down. You know, sadly, we're moving back to that super cop, you know, mentality with shows like Cops and all the arrests, and you know, the militarization of America overseas and then locally with the police. That trend is happening again in New York City. 2 weeks ago, a young man was followed and the cops kicked in his house and with very little provocation shot him, only to find out that he was completely unarmed. So it continues. But those kinds of statements and that kind of community action put the cops on notice, and there weren't video cameras, but they were eyes. They were community eyes. And then the Panthers, when they would stop, community folk would come out because people in the community had been victimized. They knew that police brutality had become standard operational procedure, and here was someone, again, in aggressive and thoughtful way standing up against that. But that was only one point in the Panther 10-point program. We wanted an immediate end to police brutality and the murder of black people. There were points that talked about housing, that talked about education, that talked about fair trials, that talked about exemption from military service. That got the most attention and brought the Panthers into the national spotlight. Again, just to kind of update the bio just a little bit, and academics in the audience will appreciate this. I'm now a full professor at Columbia University, a full professor of professional practice. The academics appreciate that, and you'll also appreciate that I am the former chair of the department. And academics know, because when you take over the chairmanship, a lot of people said to me, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry for you." And I said, "But this is such a wonderful honor." I'll tell a quick story. The one thing that I have to thank George Bush for, and here I am, you know, someone who had spent time in prison, 9.5 years in prison, earned 2 college degrees, came out, started working as an admissions counselor at some local colleges, started teaching, and then got the opportunity through Professor James Seamus and Lewis Cole at Columbia. James Seamus knew me from my stay in Sundance when I went through the directing lab, and Lewis Cole was an activist in the 60s. He was one of the leaders of SDS. They invited me to teach what I thought was going to be one course for one semester, and I was so interested in not messing up that I did really, really good. And Professor Cole called me in and he said, "I don't know how you feel about this teaching stuff." And Lewis was a tall, imposing guy, and I was like, "That's it. You know, the academic police are going to take me away from Columbia in handcuffs. I don't belong here." And then he followed, he said, but I have 2 courses for you next semester. And I was so glad I wasn't being booted. I said yes. So after a few years, I kind of rose through the ranks, passed some of my reviews, went from assistant to associate professor. And then one day, Lewis came to me and he said, Jamal, we need you to be chair of the department for 1 semester because the current chair is going to be on leave. And faculty talked about it, and we need you to step up. And I was like, but I wasn't part of the discussion. He was like, that's all right, just do it. And I didn't know. I mean, Columbia Film School is such the graduate program is such a prestigious program. And, you know, we're talking about, you know, 50 faculty members and 500 students and budgets of millions of dollars. And I'd done a lot of grassroots leadership, just didn't know if I could do it. And came home that night and, you know, flipped on, you know, CNN. You know, I kind of bounced between CNN and ESPN. And George Bush was still president. And he said something really Bush-like, which means really stupid. And something made me Google him, and he was 52 years old when he ascended to the presidency. And I was 52 years old at that time. And one thing I thank Bush for is that I said to myself, if this dumbass can be president and attempt to run the country, I can run the graduate film school and the film school at Columbia. So it's the one thing that I thank Mr. Bush for. There's always stuff in the book. I want to read something for the book, but there's always, I have a wonderful editor named Chuck Adams. And there's a story that I tell in the book, I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, about getting out of prison from Leavenworth Federal Prison and living in a tiny Harlem apartment with my wife Joyce and our son Jamal, who's now in grad school at Columbia. Joyce was pregnant when I got arrested and experienced the FBI coming in, dragging me out, and then sitting on her back, a 200-pound agent sitting on her back and putting an M16 to her head. And her screaming, I'm pregnant, get off of my back. And so Jamal is about 7 years old at this time, 6.5. And we had my son Jad, who just finished his studies at Brown University, was a baby. And it was the summertime. And it was a Harlem, not like Harlem today, which has been gentrified, and there's a lot of co-ops and condominiums, and there are brownstones that were selling for, you know, $1,000, $5,000, you know, 30 years ago that now are going for, you know, $2 to $3 million. And our particular corner was a hangout for drug dealers. And it was the crack epidemic. New York City was in a deep, deep grip of the crack epidemic, which not only wasted lives in terms of people who were personally addicted to it, but there were young gangs kind of vying for power. There were killings. There were gunshots almost every night. And this is in the summertime, and my oldest son, Jamal, has sickle cell anemia. So one of the things that you try to do is make him as comfortable as possible. And even though we could barely afford it, we had 2 air conditioners because he couldn't get too hot, he couldn't get too cold. So the air conditioners are running, and what's ever going on, it's near the 4th of July, and the kids were setting off what I thought was firecrackers. And Jad, the baby, woke up crying. And I got up and I said, I'm going to go talk to you. My wife said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to go talk to these kids. She said, you can't go talk to these kids. I said, yes, I can. When the Harlem that I grew up in the Bronx that I grew up in, any adult could come talk to any child because they understood that. They respected their elders. I said, I'm going to go talk to them and let them know that they're working people, they're senior citizens, and they can't set off firecrackers. And Joyce said, you can't go down. I said, I grew up in Harlem. She says, but not in this area. They don't know you. They don't know that you're a former Panther. They don't know that you're a community leader. They don't know, and they probably don't care. And I said, I'm going down there, right? I'm a community organizer. I'm not afraid of our own young people. And my wife literally threw herself in front of the door. And she said, you can't go. And I said, why not? And she says, what if it's not firecrackers? What if it's guns? And I said, I'm pacing the floor. And at this moment, I'm feeling more imprisoned in my own apartment than I had a few months earlier in Leavenworth. And I said, Joyce, I have to do something. And in desperation to save who she knew was her headstrong husband, grabbed a pad and a pen and said, then write, damn it, write something. And I sank down in the hallway, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, by the door, and this poem came out. I often hear gunshots from my window. Not missiles of liberation demanding freedom long overdue. Sometimes police bullets on yet another questionable mission of protection, but more often than not, just plain old gunshots. Weapons of confusion and greed fired at each other with energies of ignorance. Now, a 15-year-old kid named Billy walks down the street with a pump shotgun. Now, Billy's mad, real mad, you understand, because Ricky Doo, a baby-faced 16-year-old who can barely read or write, has the nerve to sell drugs on this corner. Never mind the children playing. The bodega. The old folks who have lived around here for 60 some odd years, never mind that, because this is Billy's corner and nobody has the right to dispense death on it except him. Ricky Doo is standing next to his brand new BMW one hot summer afternoon, while 450 years of self-hate and deprivation decide to collide with his big dream of being the biggest drug dealer in Harlem. Fire one. Adrenaline races, people scream, and Billy, bad shot that he is, has just killed a 4-year-old child. Fire two. Ricky Doo's face and the windshield of the BMW are shattered, and Billy, well, he'll be dead in a week, or in jail in a week, or in prison in a week, and 10 more will step up to take his place. God, we need help, or maybe we need a God-given war, but things have got to change, and I often hear gunshots from my window, except last night, it was firecrackers. Set off at 2 a.m. in the morning by the kids who sell crack on the corners that all of the cops and all of the babies know about. But I mean, what the heck? Last night it was only firecrackers, right? And everybody celebrates the 4th of July in Harlem, even the drug dealers. And isn't that crazy? And isn't that just right that we should celebrate the birth of a nation that killed Malcolm, Martin, and young Ricky Doo? And for the first time in my life, I thought, maybe we deserve this. Maybe we really deserve this, because you see, brothers and sisters, we always stand by as silent witnesses and thereby accomplices in the self-murder. And last night, I hear gunshots from the window. Not missiles of liberation demanding freedom long overdue, but gunshots. So good editing. I tell the story of the poem, but I had it in the book. It's like a signature poem that I perform at slams and when I speak. And Chuck Adams says, no, the poem just doesn't flow. So sometimes you have to trust your editor. But it's great because when I get out to talk to the community, I get to speak about it. This is from the book. And this is chapter 3. And the name of the chapter is Finding the Panther Lair. I walked into a Panther office in Brooklyn in September 1968. Dr. King had been assassinated in April of that year. Riots and angers flared on the street, and the shit was about to hit the fan. Black power was the phrase of the day, and hating Whitey was the hip thing to do. From street corner speeches to campus rallies, Whitey had gone from being the man to being the beast. Young black students were trading in their feel-good Motown records for the recorded speeches of Malcolm X and the angry jazz recordings of Ornette Coleman. I went down to 125th Street in Harlem the night that Dr. King was assassinated. Protesters and rioters swarmed the streets, clashing with cops, overturning cars, setting trash can fires, and hurling bricks at white-owned businesses. One of the storefront windows was shattered by an airborne trash can. Looters ran into the store and started taking clothes, appliances, and whatever else they could carry. Not everyone looted. In fact, most of the crowd continued to chant, "The King is dead" and Black Power. But it was enough for the cops to start swinging clubs, shooting their pistols, and making arrests. A cop grabbed me and threw me against the wall. Before he could handcuff me and put me in the paddy wagon, a group of rioters across the street turned over a police car. The cop told me to stay put and ran toward the rioters. I was scared, but I wasn't stupid. I took off running in the opposite direction. I blended in with a group of rioters and tried to figure out which way to go. A group of cops headed toward us. Some of the rioters ran into a clothing store that was being looted. I followed. The cops entered the store swinging clubs and making arrests. My heart pounded as I ran to the back of the store and found a back door leading to an alley. I gasped for air as I ran down the alley and was stopped by a wooden fence. Cops came into the alley. "Halt," they yelled. "Put your hands up." In my mind, I froze, put my hands in the air, and turned around to face the cops with tears in my eyes. But my body kept hauling ass. I grabbed the fence and scurried over the top like a scared alley cat. 2 shots rang out. One splintered the wood on the fence near my butt. This gave me the fear, adrenaline push I needed to flip over the fence, pick myself up off the ground, and scramble out of the alley. When I turned out on the street, I kept running, right past 2 other cops who tried to grab me, but I jerked away. Turning the corner, I almost collided with a group of 20 or so black men in leather coats and army fatigue jackets, wearing afros, berets, and standing on the corner in a military-like formation. "Stop running, brother," one of the men with the beard and tinted glasses said. "Don't give these pigs an excuse to gun you down." I doubled over, heaving, trying to catch my breath. I didn't know this man, but his voice sounded like a life raft of confidence in a sea of chaos. Moments later, 2 cops ran around the corner. They stopped in their tracks when they saw the militant men. The men closed ranks around me. "What are you doing here?" one of the cops demanded. "Move aside." The black man with the tinted glasses didn't flinch. "We're here exercising our constitutional right to free assembly, making sure no innocent people get killed out here tonight." "We're chasing looters," the cop said. "No looters here. As you can see, we're a disciplined community patrol." "You have guns?" the cops asked with a tinge of fear in his voice. "That's what you said," the man with the tinted glasses replied. "I said we're exercising our constitutional rights." The cops took in the size and the discipline of the group for a moment and walked away. By this time, I'd caught my breath, but I was speechless from what I had just seen. Black men standing down white cops. "Go straight home, young brother," the man with tinted glasses said. "The pigs are looking for any excuse to murder black folks tonight." With that, the black men walked on. I scooted down the subway and rode home. When I entered the apartment, Noonie, my adopted grandmother, was sitting on the couch watching images of Dr. King on TV. Tears fell from her eyes. She didn't even ask me where I had been, which was unusual since I was about 2 hours late getting home. I sat next to her, put my arm around her, and we watched the TV reports of the assassination and the riots. A few days later, I and a couple of other friends went to the Panther office. I came to school right after the riots and announced to my friends, my buddies who sat at the lunch table with me, that I was going to be a black militant. And one of my best friends was Paul Kirshner, a white kid, who said, "Eddie, I don't know if you can announce that you're going to be a black militant like it's a career choice, like it's a doctor or a lawyer." I was like, "No, Paul, you watch. I'm going to be a militant." So as much to prove to my buddy Paul as to myself, I had to find the most militant organization on the scene. And there were the Panthers on the news, patrolling the streets with guns and law books, storming the state capitol in Sacramento when California, moved quickly to change the gun control laws. And 2 of my older friends and I found what we assumed was the secret headquarters of the Black Panther Party. We didn't understand community organizing and that the Panthers wanted folks to come in and was doing community organizing. It was the secret headquarters. And as we're taking that long subway ride from the Bronx out to Brooklyn, there wasn't even a Harlem office yet. My friends are, and they're older than me, and they are trying to explain, or more accurately, trying to psych me out. I think they were hoping that if I got off the train, they could go. But I was going to be a man, right? One says, the Panthers are like the mafia, right? Once you get in, there's no getting out. I'm like, the mafia? But I had to be a man. I was like, I don't care. The other guy says, you got to kill a white dude to be a Panther, right? And I'm sitting there going, kill somebody? I'm an honor student. I'm a choir boy. I'm a summer camper at a camp in upstate New York. But I had to be a man in front of my boys. I don't care. And my other friend says, no. You don't have to kill a white dude. Oh, I was so relieved. Then he said, no, you have to kill a white cop. And you have to bring in his badge and his gun. Well, imagine how my stomach is pounding, how scared I am, but that Black Panther Party sign hanging over the office, and those dynamic young men and women with those leather jackets and the army fatigue jackets, and the lieutenant who was behind the information table running the meeting, explaining the Panther 10-point program, which if you go online, you'll see there's nothing in there about killing white folks, bringing in a cop's badge and gun. Am I hearing this? No. I have to prove to my boys that I'm a man. So in the middle of him explaining point number 7, I jump up, which is about education. We want education that teaches us our true history and the true nature of this decadent American society. I jump up and I go, choose me, brother. Arm me, I kill a white dude right now. The whole meeting gets quiet. He calls me up front. He says, come here, young brother. And he reaches down in the bottom drawer of this wooden desk. And my heart is pounding. I said, look how far down he's reaching. He's going to give me a big damn gun. And he hands me a stack of books. Autobiography of Malcolm X, Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver, Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, our friend from the 60s. Remember the famous little red book, quotations from Chairman Mao. Now I'm thinking, this has to be a test. So I say, excuse me, brother. I thought you were going to arm me. And he says, excuse me, young brother. I just did. And as I'm walking back to my seat, now a little bit embarrassed, right? I've been, my first 15 minutes in the Panther office, I've been chastised. He said, yep, young brother, we're not done yet. He said, you came in here talking about you want to kill white folk. Let me ask you a question. If all of these cops that are shooting people down and brutalizing people were black, and the people being brutalized were white, if all of these shop owners and storekeepers in the community who are ripping people off with high prices and spoiled vegetables and rotten meat, if they were black and the people being ripped off were white, and then he got colorful, the Panthers would get real colorful. And he said, all of these jive-time, demagogic, fascist, pig politicians, if all of them were black and the people being exploited and oppressed were white, would that make things correct? This time I answered with a part of my brain instead of my now wounded want-to-be-a-man adolescent ego, and I said, no, it seems like it would still be wrong. He said, that's right, young brother. This is a class struggle for human rights, not just a race struggle. Study those books so you understand what the revolution is all about. That was my first day in the Panther office. And then as I was leaving, something that I like to talk about, which became another refrain in the Black Panther Party. And indeed we studied, indeed we learned the 10-point program, and we read those books, and we read Chairman Mao and Che and Marx and Lenin, because we were talking about redistributing the wealth and class struggle. But as I was leaving that first day, there was a poster of Che Guevara on the wall. And there was a quotation there that said, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, let me say that revolutionaries are guided by great feelings of love. And I watched that because I hadn't been raised to hate. Noonie raised me. Her parents had been slaves. She understood lynching, the Ku Klux Klan brutality firsthand. That's what she had seen in the South. She had been an activist herself. She had been part of Garvey's Back to Africa movement, was active in the NAACP, even at 70 years old. And this conversation about love blew my mind a little bit, like, why are we standing up so strongly against the government, and it's about love? And he says, because you will lay down your life for your brother and your sister. You will lay down your life for what you believe. That was manifested in the Panthers' breakfast program, feeding kids. It became a model for a lot of the food programs that exist today. With no money, the program was established. You go to a community center, a church basement, you ask, can you use the kitchen and the dining room? You get some folks in the community that will come help the Panthers cook so that the people running the center didn't think it was purely a Black Panther takeover. And then you go to local merchants and not ask for money, but ask for food. A case of pancake mix from one vendor, milk from another vendor, eggs from another. And you put out a flyer, and there is no shortage of hungry kids in the community. We learned that from the civil rights movement, that you organize people around their needs. It's something that I like to say to people who are standing up now, to the various movements, to the student movements, to the Occupy movements. At a certain point, we can't be preaching to one another. You have to organize those folks in the community. And freedom to somebody who is hungry is, guess what? A meal. Freedom to someone who is homeless and cold is, guess what? Safe and warm shelter. Freedom to someone who can't see a doctor because they have no insurance, because they can't pay their medical bills, is a clinic where you can go be treated. We opened health clinics with no money. We found a storefront. We got committed young doctors and nurses to give up one day a week, their day off, who would bring medicine, who would bring themselves and treat people in the community. That's the power of the people. The Panthers would say all power to the people. And that meant black power to black people, white power to white people, brown power to brown people, red power to red people, and yellow power to yellow people. The transformation in my life, I was arrested at 15 as part of the Panther 21 case. and went to prison first for a year, came out, became the youngest, since I was now part of a very well-known political case, became one of the youngest national spokespersons for the Black Panther Party. Went back to prison when the Panthers decided to take armed action against the drug epidemic in Harlem. There were rows and rows of abandoned buildings where there were open air, in plain view, drug supermarkets. The police were doing nothing about it. People were dying. Kids were overdosing. I'm talking about kids who were 9, 10, and 11. So we began to go in by force with guns and shut the drug dens down. I wound up going to prison for armed robbery because, yes, even when it's a drug dealer and you're taking the heroin and flushing down the toilet, it's armed robbery. Came out, went to Brooklyn College, got involved in theater, and then went back to prison where I was ultimately convicted for the federal crime of hiding out people, my brothers and sisters who were former Panthers and part of the SDS, who were on the run for the FBI. And when I got to prison, something amazing happened. An old convict gave me some advice. He said, "Young blood, you can serve this here time, or you can let this time serve you." And that's when I knew and decided I was going to take full advantage of all of the college programs and every opportunity. And then he surprised me. He said, "Young blood, you did plays and things when you were out there." I was like, how did he know that? Does this violate the convict code? The convict code is very strict. Don't steal from another convict. Don't rat on another convict. Do your own time. There's a lot of ways. The same way we have 100,000 laws, to interpret 10 commandments. There are a lot of ways that you could violate it. I was like, am I a punk now because I did theater? Did I do something wrong? So I wound up writing a play, and the Black History Month play. And I had two guys who didn't want to really be actors, but they were there because the same man told us that we all had to be there. And we're rehearsing, and in the middle of the rehearsal, two members of the Latino gang, the Mexican Mafia, the leaders, walked into the rehearsal. Now, this was a bad sign, because in prison, everybody has their own spots in the yard, black, white, Latino, and nobody violates anybody's real estate, and nobody leaves their area unless it's to kill somebody. And these two guys had actually five or so murders since they had been in prison. They were lifers, and so, they got into a beef, they killed someone, it was like, give me the extra 20 years, I don't care, you want my driver's license too? And one of the guys came and he said, he's watching the rehearsal, and I'm looking out the corner of his eye, and he gets madder and madder and madder. I can see he's upset. And finally he stands up and he says, "Yo, Esse, let me speak to you a minute." He says, "We heard what you're doing, homie, and we had to check it out. And I'm going to tell you something. That guy, that effing guy that you're working with, Holmes, he's not feeling his character." So I said, "Why don't you come in and do it?" So they joined. So it became a Black and Latino play. And one of the toughest white guys in the joint came to a rehearsal. When he returned to his courtyard, his section of the yard, all of the white prisoners gathered around him. And they said, "What are the blacks and the Mexicans doing?" He said, "A play." And he said, "Well, what happened? What did you do about it?" And he said, "Well, they gave me a part." And we became that multicultural force within the prison. And that was transformative because I started to understand the power of creative arts and social change. And so with that, I thank you, and we'll open up the floor for questions.
When you were 15 and choosing to join the Panthers, did you look at other avenues to get involved with instead? Did you choose between SNCC and the Panthers, or CORE, or any of the other groups to express your interest?
A brief investigation, but part of the attraction of the Panther Party for me was I never knew my dad. I found out much later that I was conceived in Cuba, and that my dad was a hero of the revolution, fought alongside Fidel and Che. My adopted grandfather died a few years earlier, so I was as much seeking the path to manhood as I was political involvement, and nobody had that kind of swagger that the Black Panther Party had.
So I have a question about prison. I've never been to prison, but I'm concerned that it's such a dangerous place, and why society seems to accept that it's okay for it to be dangerous.
I'm sorry, what's such a dangerous place?
Prison.
Yes. One of the things that I'd like to say is that at the time that I was in prison, America was number 3 in the amount of people that it had incarcerated. behind the then Soviet Union and South Africa. And there were a few 100,000 people locked up, 4, maybe 500,000 people. I've been out of prison for 25 years, and we are number one, with over 2 million people behind bars. And it is a quick fix for politicians who say that I'm making things better, that I'm being tough on crime. It is a profit maker. So that's why we have private industry getting into the prison business, and even federal and state prisons that can get into the prison industry business make money because they make things like mail bags for the postal service, fiber optic cable, all kinds of things. And when you're just paying someone 50 cents or $1 an hour, you're going to make a profit. Sadly, some of our most liberal politicians have ignored the problem or have used that as a way to say, see, I'm tough. You know, in the face of the wave of conservatism over the years, you see, I'm tough. We built more prisons. We're giving people longer sentences. Knowing that won't fix the problem because the men who are in prison and the women are for the most part there because they're people of color, because they're undereducated, and that we need to be thinking about getting people to Yale instead of jail. But then that program, like the program that I went through with University of Kansas, doesn't exist anymore. And the only way to change that is to take it to the streets, to demonstrate outside the prisons, to make that an issue. There's something called the Jericho movement. There's Professor Michelle Alexander, who's written a brilliant book called The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration. And so that awareness is raised about it. But the other thing we have to do is try to break the cycle before it starts. And that's been a large part of my work since I've been home from prison. I run a not-for-profit, a really grassroots organization called Impact Repertory Theater, where we mentor young people. And the creative arts is like the attraction. They come in, they get free lessons in music, dance, and drama, but a big portion of the day is what we call peer leadership, where we talk about issues in the community and around the world so that they can think critically. We don't teach our young people, especially poor young people, to think critically. Most of us didn't know what critical thinking was until we got to college. Unless we had parents who were active or who were educators, we didn't know what critical thinking was. And then out of that, they create work that they take into the community, but they also get a commitment to some form of activism, even if it's not the creative arts. So if you have 2 million people locked up, how many children of prisoners are in line to follow in their parents' footsteps unless we have community programs, centers, education programs, and real mentorship where we're spending time, one afternoon a week, one day a week, makes a huge difference in a young person's life. I think we can all think about that mentor, that person that made a difference, that just continued to check on us and just continued to make sure that we were okay, to make sure that we understood that we had everything that we needed within us to make a difference personally and to make a difference in other people's lives. So we really have to address it. Policy, I know people were really, really involved in the policy aspect of what's going on in prison and organizing former prisoners. I want to keep kids out of prison. And I'm happy to say that with very little funding, that Impact has been in existence for 15 years, and several hundred of our kids are in college or have graduated from college.
I was curious, whatever happened to some of your associates in the Black Panthers from long ago? Have you ever kept in contact with them at all? Or?
Yes. I think people wound up, not to be too broad, kind of in 3 different ways from that experience. Being so young, experiencing these attacks that happened, the J. Edgar Hoover went before Congress in 1968 and declared that the Black Panther Party was the greatest threat to the internal security of America. And with that, he had permission to launch a covert operation against the Black Panther Party and the American Indian movement, also SDS and other organizations, but those were the 2 primary targets, called the Counterintelligence Program, COINTELPRO. And this was a program of disinformation, where informers and undercover cops came in and created situations where Panthers could be arrested or killed. For example, Fred Hampton was killed, brilliant speaker, was organizing the gangs in Chicago, turning them into a progressive force, getting them to lay down their guns. And for this, the state, the powers of the state decided that he needed to go. And it was an FBI informer that gave them the floor plans to Fred Hampton's apartment. They kicked in Fred Hampton's door, murdered him while he was sleeping in Mark Clark. And the Panthers always maintained that it was murder. Finally, after years of litigation, the city of Chicago settled for about $12 or $15 million to Fred's family and the other survivors of that raid. But Panthers were being arrested daily, being shot at, if not killed monthly or weekly. And you keep in mind how young they were, so you have to picture what it would be like on that level to lose a lot of your best friends from high school and college in a real traumatic way, experiencing death and living under that paranoia. Years later, a group of radical students broke into an FBI office in Ohio, and a lot of the crimes of the FBI came to light. But the damage that was done, and getting back to the question, a lot of Panthers wound up in prison. Some are still in prison, like Mumia Abu-Jamal. A lot went through, as I did, post-traumatic stress, and started drinking and using drugs. Fortunately, my period was relatively short, and that last trip to prison saved me, because I found meaning and found a new way to fight the struggle, the revolution. But those Panthers who survived, yes, we are in touch, and they're doing amazing things. Kathleen Cleaver is an attorney and a law professor at Emory University. My friend Joseph Harris is a doctor. He has a piece of a Nobel Prize for being part of Doctors Without Borders. And as you would expect, in areas of social work, social justice, law, education, medicine, those Panthers who survived are working there because we cared about change. We loved people. And we were the brightest and inquisitive minds of our generation. Why are things this way? Why isn't the civil rights movement working? And why we believed that black and white should be separate when the real issue is not black and white, but the haves and the have-nots? So we stay in touch. We just had a 45th reunion in Philadelphia, and a lot of folks came out. Bobby Rush, who's now a congressman, Bobby Seale, who's still here. And Bobby Seale says something amazing about how struggle progresses. And he talks about the evolution of a revolutionary. He says that when he and Huey started the Black Panther Party, they patrolled the streets with shotguns and law books because those were the dynamic weapons of change. Remember how violent the country just in general was. So we're talking about riots and the war in Vietnam and police brutality and National Guard, killing students. Students are demonstrating on their college campuses, and at Mississippi State, black students are gunned down by the local police. And at Kent State, Ohio, white students are gunned down. Look at America's response to protest. So he said those were the dynamic weapons of social change. But that if he and Huey Newton, who co-founded the party, were starting the party today, Panthers would still be on the street in a real aggressive fashion. But they'd be patrolling the streets with video cameras and laptop computers, because these are the weapons of social change. But I just want to say, it can't just be social media. You can't just be blogging about human rights. You can't just be blogging about the injustices of prison. The statistic that says 1 in 4 young black men who graduate from high school will wind up in college, but 1 in 3 is guaranteed to go to prison. These are not made-up numbers. Every prison that I was in, and it's even true today, whether I was in Rikers Island, which was predominantly black, which is in New York City, but when I would be in places like Leavenworth, which is in Kansas, the majority of the prisoners are people of color. So I want to say that I love that quote, but I also always like to say that you've got to be in a room You've got to listen to other people's stories. You have to serve people because poor people are struggling. So you organize around their needs. They'll take a moment to listen about what they can do. LL Cool J was on CNN last night doing an interview, and he was talking about some good things. But he said one thing that I don't completely agree with. Pierce Morgan asked him, he says, so what do you say to people in those poor communities? And he says, I say, look at me. I'm sorry. Right? Even before things were terribly, terribly bad, even before the disappearing middle class, this real separation between the haves and the have-nots. You know, the percentage of people who are gonna make it, young black men, young brown men, poor white young men, you know, the percentage of them who are going to wind up playing professional sports, being an entertainer, being an actor, is minuscule. So you have to do more than say, look at me, there's hope. You have to say, this is the road. This is the path to personal empowerment. Here's some food in the morning. Here's a center with computers where you can come do your homework. Here's a place where you can come so you don't have to hang out on the street corner. And by the way, there's some pretty tough guys here playing basketball and writing poetry and doing a community newsletter. But they understand, like the Panthers understood, that real toughness is love and service.
I've got a couple questions, but you don't have to answer all of them. First, where you're from in New York City, there are laws I've read about that have racial impact or a disparity between the races. For example, cops will ask people to empty their pockets when they're black and Latino in order to have them publicly display marijuana so they can arrest them. Do you work with any organizations that work to change these laws?
Yes, the answer is yes. But it's for me, my work, there's only so many hours in the day. And I decided when I came out of prison that and it was really my wife that made me realize that, you know, I could be active and be speaking about, all of these issues, right? The environment and police brutality and class struggle and, all of these things that we get, healthcare. But who's talking to the kids, she said.
Yeah.
How do you break that cycle? So I've actually dedicated myself to that work. And I think initially people, if I was at rehearsal with the young people doing leadership, some of my comrades from the movement didn't understand. Within about 3 years, they'd be calling me up saying, we're having this big rally. We know we need your young people to come perform and to run a workshop so that the other kids can understand what they can be doing. So that's been my work. But in that context, we try to make sure that our young people are aware of all of these things, that they march, that they do community service, and that they understand that this is a global struggle. Yes, 700,000 stop and frisk last year. Most of them black and brown people. 700,000. By the way, the complexion of the New York City Police Department has changed. Over half the force, as a guesstimate, are black and Latino. But it is the mentality, it's the consciousness of the system. It's that same thing that they said to me the first day in the Panther office. This stuff is not going to be correct if everybody in power was black and everybody being oppressed was right. You're just, oppression is oppression. We have to fight against it. So we want to empower young people to think critically. By the way, Impact is not a baby Black Panther Party. Once or twice a year, when we're doing like Black History Month stuff, that I'll come in, my members who run the program now, who are college grads and college students, will say, Uncle Jamal, you got to come, talk to the kids about the Panthers. I didn't want people to come in and dismiss them saying that it's ideological. Jamal has a baby Panther organization. The same way creatively, the young people create their own work. So I'm a screenwriter and I'm a director, but I don't have one of these theater companies or dance companies where, how you have the choreographer, who's like 70 years old and he goes, I have a teen program, but they're doing all of her dances and they're doing all of the playwrights' plays. I want them to find their voices and be empowered. Think critically and think how they can be active their whole life. And we have a saying in Impact that when you combine an activist and an artist, that you have an artivist. One other thing real important to say, because you named a few issues. One of the great things about what happened in the 60s was that movement folk, progressive folk, talk to each other. So you'd be like, there'd be a campus takeover someplace, and then afterwards you'd be in the dining hall of the dorm room, and you'd be there with young people from the Black Liberation Movement, from the anti-war movement, from the women's movement, from the workers' movement, and you'd be sharing and getting all this information. And guess what you did with that information? When you went back to give your next organizing speech, you started talking about those things. You started saying, as Young Panthers, we started saying things like, we can't talk about black liberation unless we talk about women's liberation. Unless we look at women as an oppressed minority. Unless we understand that black women, because she's black and because she's a woman, is the most oppressed person in society. What do we do about that, people? You get people there to go back and start looking at their families and their behaviors differently. You get people there who, if you're feeding them in the breakfast program and helping them in the health clinic and showing them how to organize rent strikes, that actually understand the correlation between United States military occupying Vietnam and other spots around the world and occupying their community and rallying around that. And then you have something that's really uncomfortable. You have a women's movement rally where you have a whole lot of black and Latino folk. You have a police brutality rally where there's a whole lot of workers and white folk. And then you start talking about this mass organization that really changes things, the way the anti-war movement put so much pressure on the government that it had to end the war in Vietnam.
My other question is, what do you see as the spiritual successors to the goals of the Black Panthers, STS, etc.?
I think that's still evolving. We talked about the evolution of a revolutionary. The most exciting thing that's happened are the Occupy movements. And the media is doing, and politicians are doing exactly what they did to young people in the 60s, trying to be dismissive about it, trying to say that they're bums, that they're unemployed. These are brilliant young people. These are people who are taking leaves from their college careers and from other things to kind of get together because they really, really care, and they're willing to put personal comfort in their lives on the line to make change. And the fact that it's unformed and there's not one single charismatic leader is a smart thing. I do have to say, from knowing some of the people in the Occupy movement, that that's not quite true. But they're smart enough to realize that it's so easy to identify one or two people and then attack them and dismiss the movement. I mean, anybody knows that, how dirty we play in terms of any public figures. But they are highly organized, and they communicate, and they know where they're going to go, where they're going to be, how people are going to be fed. And I think that as that expands, and as people we're talking about occupying prisons, or at least outside of the prisons, and occupying the schools, not in terms of just taking the schools over, but having those after schools and weekend programs that supplement an education system that's sorely lacking in most of the country. You get a good education if you get into one of the better school districts, right? People are moving to do that, or if you're paying, what's college tuition, for a private high school. Or if you win a lottery, they have a thing in New York called Prep for Prep, where inner city kids can, get to go to some of the more prestigious private schools. But it shouldn't be a privilege. It's a right. Healthcare shouldn't be a privilege. It's a right. Pursuing your dreams shouldn't be a privilege. It's a right. And I think we're having a conversation that's expanding, and I'm very excited about it. I just want people to make sure they're talking about all of these issues the way we did, so they understand the connection between what's happening to working folks and working poor students with higher tuition and less opportunities, the prisons, healthcare, that people are having this conversation so they can come back and enlighten their communities.
It seems to me one of the interesting things about the current moment is what's seeming to be a corporatization of the movement, in that we have your Move On organization, you have the Credo organization, you have all of these organizations that have become fixtures on Facebook, to the point where one organization today, pulled 500,000 signatures for a petition around the pipeline. I'm an old community organizer, 20 years in the field. And I know that eventually 500 signatures is going to be meaningless. And it's going to have to be 1 million signatures. And then it's going to have to be 1,500,000 signatures, et cetera. And I'm really afraid that in this moment, we're going to think that clicking like is going to be a revolutionary activity.
Yeah, absolutely. From the comfort of your home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And how do we move? And I think Occupy is the beginning of moving that.
Yes.
But how do you see this thing evolving?
Well, you said something about the movement being co-opted and corporatized. And we understood that there. There were certain people who would, after a community organization, it might be the Panthers, it might be someone else, would get out in front of what was going on and try to come and co-opt it. And we, quite frankly, didn't stand for it. And would call people out. But would call them out with the way, if you really want to participate, here's what you can do. I think the people, and as we used to say in the 60s, the masses of the people recognize folks who are in the community, working with them around their needs. It remains the best way to organize. Issues, Maslow talked about people's hierarchy of needs. And food, clothing, shelter. And most people are struggling around those issues. Everyone I know. I'm talking about Columbia colleagues, a lot of folks in the film business are 1 or 2 paychecks away from not being able to make it. Families that have 2 incomes are maybe 4 paychecks away. Used to be that second income would be the nest egg and you'd get the second house or do that. That's not true anymore. So we've got to be organizing around the issues of health, feeding people, the working poor, but I mean feeding people, and then start to talk about what they can do. And mass movements in that way will do 1 or 2 things. It will force the people who are head of these other organizations to kind of come out and stand shoulder to shoulder with the folks, or to let the masses go like, I don't have time for that right now. I'm on my way to this event. I'm on my way to mentor. I'm on my way to serve some meals. And yes, I get to take some meals home after that, but the community love and empowerment is showing how we're going to get through this. So yeah, I totally agree that social media is the beginning. I talk about this endlessly when I travel and I speak at colleges and high schools. Clicking and pointing is not activism. It's information. But in the Panthers, I'll kind of leave with this thing that just came back to me. We used to say all theory is based on practice. You have to get out and practice what it is that you're talking about in those communities that you're organizing, in those people that you're serving and fighting for.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
I just want to say you're very inspirational. I'm a high school teacher, and I teach the lowest of the demographic. We have 62 nationalities at our school, and it's over 70% free and reduced lunch. And we have such a culture of apathy with our students that success is so far beyond their sight. So their influence, of course, are the pop icons, pop culture. And they see the NBA players. They see the success that they have, and that's where their sights are. So when you encounter those cultural icons and those pop culture people, what are your commentary? What do you give to them, your insights and your experience that they can then carry on? Because that's my area of frustration, where we try and overcome this area of apathy with our students.
It's an area of frustration for me too, because I'm a filmmaker, and because I've had this, this incredible journey through the arts, being at the Oscars with my young people, I do know a lot of people, who have been quite successful in film and in music, hip hop legends and pop legends, and I've sat privately with Diana Ross for 3 hours, just kicking it. We were talking about a film idea, and it just, it turned into a conversation about life. I just try to leave, and they will say, "Oh, we're so inspired about you just doing this," and I don't ask for money, although money would be great for the program. I just say that the real hands-on give back would be if you did that program, if you established a mentoring program where you showed up and you got your colleagues to show up. I was very close to Tupac Shakur. My first book was Tupac Legacy. And his mom, Afeni Shakur, was my big sister in the Black Panther Party. So I literally knew Tupac from the day that he was born. And we would get into it about thug life sometimes. And I would be like, Tupac, what is this thug life stuff? And when he would see me, he would know that I cared about him. You know, I didn't want a record deal. You know, I wasn't trying to borrow any money. I cared about him. And I would say, Tupac, what is thug life? And, you know, Malcolm X was a thug and a criminal, and he went to prison and educated himself and became one of the most important leaders of the 20th century. Huey Newton and Bobby Seale grew up little tough kids in Oakland. And then they went to and met in college and in law school, and they started the Black Panther Party. You're a Panther Cub. You're a legacy. Why are you going the other way? And he would say, oh, Uncle Jamal, I got to keep it real with the niggas who keep it real with me. But something happened after Tupac got shot the first time. And I went to see him. I was there the night that he got shot. I'm one of the people, you know, there's the story of Tupac checking himself out the hospital. I'm one of the people that helped him do that. He was convinced something else would happen. It wasn't just that he was just being, you know, Tupac, but he was convinced that he wasn't safe. Afeni said, you talk to him. I kneeled down. I held him. I said, Tupac, you're shot. He said, Uncle Jamal, take me someplace else. I just don't want to be here. And then he was convicted of the sexual misconduct, and I went to prison to see him. One of my early jobs, I studied law in prison, and I was a paralegal. So I was able to use my paralegal ID and sit with him one-on-one. And he came out, and he said, Uncle Jamal, before you start, he said, I want to tell you a story. He said, a guy came up to me in here. He was in Bellevue prison ward, and another young prisoner, they brought him down for an operation. And he saw me. He says, oh, Tupac, I can't believe you're here. Oh, man, I love you, dog. You're my hero. And Tupac said, stop. Why am I your hero? And he said, oh, come on, don't be playing, man. You got all the girls. You be getting money. You shot at the police. And Tupac said, time out. If that's why I'm your hero, then I don't need to be anybody's hero. And he said, Uncle Jamal, I realize that thug life has to change. And he says, and so what I'm going to do, and I didn't even realize, you know, this was my godson, right? I didn't realize all the people that Tupac knew, right? That he had like on speed dial. He says, so I already been talking to people. He says, but Madonna knows, Mickey Rourke knows, you know, not just the other people in hip hop, that we've got to start these community centers, these arts and activist centers all around the country and do hands-on mentoring. He unfortunately got hooked up with Suge Knight and that whole death row scene, and the East Coast, West Coast thing, you know, thing escalated. But a couple of months before he died, he had once again denounced thug life. He had started something called the One World Project and was recording an album with East Coast and West Coast rappers, and was on TV a number of times saying, the media's keeping this beef alive. We're done. We're going to move on. So that's what I do. I get a lot of respect because of my work as a filmmaker, because of my body of work, but also because I'm a former Black Panther leader, and in the Black community, in the hip hop community, that's like an icon. You know, there's still Black Panther references when people rhyme, and you'll see those images. So I understand all of that. So as much as I can, this is what I've learned. Whether a person is just starting out and I'm talking to a young person in high school, I want to share something with you. Or I'm talking to someone that's already established and I met them. You know, if I'm hanging out with Damon Dash or 50 Cent and other people that I'll hang with sometimes, I will push, hoping that the seed gets planted. And then sometimes years later you go, wow, they're doing the work. I was walking in Harlem a few months ago, and a young man was standing by the bus stop, and I was walking with my son, who's in grad school at Columbia. And he stopped me and he said, Mr. Joseph. I said, hey, how you doing? I gave that smile, you know, when you're quite. He said, you don't remember me. He said, but I remember you. He said, I was one of those knuckleheads in that Department of Probation program that you taught. He said, and it may not have seemed like that stuff was getting through then. He said, but I'm a father. He says, and I'm a teacher. And I feel my challenge is to work with that generation of knuckleheads. I want to thank you. It took a while to kick in. So bring those books, bring those videos, bring those sound bites, let the kids watch it, Let them understand that Tupac studied Shakespeare in high school, that he studied ballet in high school, that he was very literate, that his mom made him read the New York Times when he was a kid, and get those kind of before success stories for some of those icons to make them understand that even in terms of your heroes, that there was some education, a strong work ethic, and people that they still continue to respect.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I'm curious to know, when you think about the 60s and when you were coming of age and looking for something and searching for something and found the Panthers, how would you compare what you see now with the young people, the similarities and the differences in our society, and how we're responding to it as a society?
Well, the similarities are that police occupying the communities, lack of opportunities, bad schools, bad health care, especially for young people. When we talk about health care, the thing we don't talk about is what poor health care young people get. And that their first line of health care for a lot of poor kids is the emergency room. They're not getting regular checkups, prevention, that kind of counseling. The difference is that people are not really doing anything about it. And they're not these organizations, these outlets. On college campuses, they are. There'll be, student activist groups, but they're not these community-based organizations like the Young Lords, like the Panther Party, like Students for a Democratic Society, like the Patriot Party, which was modeled after the Panthers started in Baltimore, but they were white. So the kids are joining gangs because they're angry the same way that I was angry, and they want to be part of something bigger than themselves the way I did. And remember, I wasn't so political when I walked into the Panther office. And if it had been Crips or the Bloods or another gang, I might have wound up there. Fortunately for me, I stumbled into a place that understood my rage, my loneliness, my desire to do something, and then I got an environment where a political consciousness got shaped and an activist got shaped. So we need more of that. We need these alternatives. I write about a mentoring group in New York that I came through called the Order of the Feather Fraternity, which was a rite of passage program for young men. I still volunteer there. That organization still exists. And that organization was started in 1946 in response to a gang epidemic that was happening in Harlem. And the men who ran this organization, who had been social workers and Boy Scout leaders, some of them had been gang members, but now were college-educated men, said, kids want to belong to something tough, we'll make it tough. We'll have a little kind of pledge process that they have to go through. But it's going to be about service and education. And then when a gang initiation takes 3 minutes or 15 minutes, our process is going to last 6 months. And then after they graduate, they'll be able to wear a sweater that says that they're part of this organization that they earned. And the other guys in the community will look at that and have to respect that. So that's a model. I can't go back to the mentorship models or not. Broad funding, we've yet to see it. Mayor Bloomberg and the Soros Foundation announced a $30 million thing to help young black and Latino men. I was happy to see it. I don't see it on the ground in terms of these mentoring, grabbing these kids off the street corner saying, come on, let's play a little basketball and have a pizza. And then afterwards going like, what you about, man? What's going on? And not talk so much about, and start talking about college and just saying, all I need for you, like we can hang out, and I hope get this, is first year, we're going to turn some of those D's into C's, and then C's into B's. That kind of mentorship. Maya Angelou has this great quote that I heard her say years and years ago, before I was even a parent, and it applies to mentoring, coming back to what you were saying. She says, the thing about parenting is this. You don't have to be perfect, but you have to be available. So I'm for grassroots availability and on-the-ground mentoring. It is the way. Not someone just floating in and just giving a great speech. People call me all the time because, Jamal's going to give a great speech, and they're going to listen to him. But then I'll meet with the teachers and the people in that room saying, how can we connect? Come see what I'm doing at Impact. Come see how you can build a model of what we're doing. Because me coming in giving a great speech will make the kids applaud and think about it that day. But that Saturday, when they're waking up hungry, and when their parents are yelling at them, or only one parent is there, their love is going to be on that street corner. It's got to go beyond me just showing up and inspiring your kids in one speech. Thank you.
Hi. You talked about sort of the aggressive and thoughtful action that inspired you in a lot of ways in the 60s, and I'm curious what you think sort of aggressive and thoughtful action looks like today. Is it Occupy? Is it mentorship? Sort of what is that?
You know, the thing that we understood from the civil rights movement and then from, you know, the black liberation and the anti-war movement is that it has to happen on a lot of different levels. So it has to happen on the policy level. It has to happen on the student level because these are very soon to be leaders of society. So if they're coming out of school thinking that I've got to use this degree not just to make some money, but in some way to serve and to give back. Example: many more Panthers would have gone to jail. The Panther 21 included. Were it not for the dedication of young lawyers just getting out of law school, who had student loans, who had Jerry Lefcourt, who's a dear friend, who was lead counsel, was 26 years old. William Kunstler was originally the lawyer, and then he had to leave to do the Chicago 7 trial. And was in court all day with us, and then his family owned a hotel, so he was the manager of the ballroom. He was like doing soul dances. Like when I do the film, this scene has to be in there. That this brilliant young attorney, because he wasn't making any money for us, that he was giving these dances so he could earn a little bit of money to eat and to pay his rent. But he knew that this kind of work was important. So on the student level. And then on the community level, there is no other way but action. There's a wonderful organization in Harlem called Mothers Against Violence. All of these women have lost children to gun violence, most at the hands of other young black men. Some have lost daughters. Some have lost 2 children. To see these women come out and share their stories, and to do these events where they're feeding kids, where they're doing cultural events, we work very closely with them, shows you what activism on the ground looks like. So it's all of those levels, right? Policy, students, community programs. I can't stress community programs a lot. We have masses of people who are totally forgotten. No one is coming in to help in that way, and to help in a way where you're teaching people how to be grassroots organizers. The lessons I learned in the Black Panther Party about how to organize a program. It's not just that we serve people. How do you pull together a help plan? How do you organize a program? How do you organize a liberation school? How do you reach out? How do you build solidarity? How do you build consensus? Those are the things that helped me be chair of Columbia University, because professors are crazy and combative. And they still said, you're the most diplomatic person that we have. But do you understand? So it's not just that you're feeding people. You're saying, we want you to help run this program. We want you to understand how it goes so that you could go to another community and run one, or that as you get older that you can run one. That's how you build a movement. You build a mass movement of young leaders. Not just people rallying around one charismatic leader, but you build a mass generation of young leaders and scholars and activists. Got time for... Oh, okay. 1 or 2 more. Very good. And then I think I get to sign some books. Okay.
This is or maybe a random and inappropriate inquiry, but would you do me a favor and tease out from the audience their background, why they came here tonight? You know, me personally, I heard you on NPR this morning.
Right.
But I don't know if it's a doable thing because there's no microphone out there. But I was just curious because I see some variety of people here, and I'm just, geez, I wonder.
Well, if anybody's willing to do that, that would be fine. We have this thing at Impact called Safe Space. And it's our number one principle. We get kids in. Some kids have two-parent households, single parents, grandmothers. Let me tell a quick story. A young man who grew up in the program, I want to go back to this mentoring. Raised by his grandmother, right? We started mentoring him aggressively. Got him into Rice High School, which is a good school. Young man went to Yale. And as a young black man in Yale, had his choice of programs that he could go to and get a ride, get support. Law school, MBA. Because of his experiences, he chose to go to Michigan State, got a master's in education, came back to New York City, became a co-founding dean of a charter school at the age of 23. So that kind of mentoring, makes a difference. But we have a thing called safe space, which means, obviously that you're physically safe, but also safe to be who you are. I love impact when a kid gets up who can sing good and they get applause, and a kid sings off key and they get even more applause. Because that safe space, number one thing that we want, and why we come to certain places, are we safe. Then O stands for outstanding effort. And the S stands for service. Service to your family, friends, and community. So those are kind of core values that we have in the Kids in Impact. And if you see what those letters are, it's SOS. But instead of save our ships, it means saving ourselves. My program is now run by the young people who came through at 8 or 9 years. I come into on a Saturday, and I have to ask, can I teach something today? Because they have the curriculum. And when we started out, when my wife and I and my producing partner, who's a legend in theater, Rosa Rivers, he produced Serafino on Broadway, we said, we'll know that we're doing our job when we create a program / a movement that can run without us. So kind of that empowerment. So in the spirit of safe space, we'll throw that question out. If people want to say how they got here, cool. If not, it's safe space.
I have one more question, so.
Okay, we'll deal with the question and then maybe afterwards. What's your name, sir, who stood up and asked that question? Sean? Maybe afterwards people, because I think it's an interesting, interesting poll. Maybe people want to share with
I
Sean.
can say I'm here because I was interested in like my ignorance from what the Black Panthers meant, and so I wanted to hear like firsthand stories of what you experienced. So thank you. Thanks for your human rights stuff that you've done in the past. So I would like to hope that we can stay ahead of the curve of some of the issues that have happened in history, repeating itself in a better way. And you mentioned the Jericho Project, and then you mentioned one other one. Could you repeat that one regarding the prison systems? You mentioned a book, New Jim Crow.
Yeah, that falls into the Jericho Project. But if you Google Michelle Alexander and that book, Mass Incarceration and New Jim Crow, go to her website. They have links of groups that people can be involved in.
And the reason, my question for you though is just any insight into the fact that I feel like the privatization of prisons, and that's like kind of coming across the nation. And I've heard statistics from the University of Washington that there's actually a couple of empty prisons sitting around in Montana or Idaho, the Washington and Oregon, within those 4 states, regions. And I don't think people are aware of that. And that's like, a really strange idea, build them and they shall come, and you're talking about a prison. And I think it's really great information that we as, society know that's out there. And like, with that kind of mentality of happening, can you just give any insight into, I know that problem has been around for such forever, but just any insight that you can give from your experience.
Well, the fact that poor people in general and poor people of color in particular wind up in prison is alarming, and something that we should be investigating, challenging, just doing that. The fact that it has grown, as I said, from that number of 400,000 or 500,000 to over 2 million, and that and that prisons have totally just become a breeding ground for more gangs and more crimes. I talk in the book about how we started a collective in prison in Rikers Island. Yeah, I had to fight and beat one guy down. I resisted it, but they said the only way to get respect is to beat this guy down. He's trying to set you up. He's trying to rape you. And then when I came out of the hole, everybody said, well, you're the leader now. What do you want to do? I was like, here's what we're going to do. It's a collective. We're going to pool resources. We're not going to do this loan sharking thing where, you give someone one bag of cookies and they have to get 3 bags of cookies back, and kind of raping guys, that culture of violence. And we started literacy classes and political education classes and martial arts classes. It was amazing transformation. But you don't have, Mumia Abu Jamal, who's been in prison for over 20 years, they respect him. They call him Pop, right? But there's not that element coming in, that radical element that's politicizing prisoners, right? So we have to address that. And the way to address that is to communicate with those prisoners who are inside, so that they're having the support, a little bit of commissary money, the books, the things that they need to organize. And I hate to come back to the same thing, but this has been my area of work, to start mentoring and creating these programs before these kids wind up in the prison system. For all of the things that I do well, I'm not the greatest fundraiser in the world. I'm really not. Impact has been a grassroots program for day one. My producing partner and I and my wife put in some of our own money. People said, "You're crazy, you've been doing such good work." But we understood. A kid got killed in my building. A kid from my building went to a party and got killed. This is back in 1997. His mother, who was a single mom, who had gotten an associate's degree, who had a son and a daughter, was so overcome with grief that the apartment was too small to deal with her grief. So she went outside and started crying. All of the women in the neighborhood were around her, consoling her, and they were crying because they knew this kid. He was a good kid. He got shot at a party because his sister was there, and he was trying to tell his sister to go home and trying to tell the guy to leave his sister alone. The guy responded by shooting him. And then the men in the community, in our building and on that block, we were standing around, helpless, looking at black mothers mourn the loss of yet another black child. Helpless. And I felt like I'm standing in Harlem in 1997. I could be standing in Mississippi after a lynching in 1867. I could be in South Africa in 1957. I've got to do something right here in this community. So with the desire, finding some space and just a little bit of money, we started a program that 1,000 young people have come through. So we wait. A lot of times people go like, yeah, I'm going to get out, I'm going to get the funding, and I'm going to do this. No, we are in an urgent state, and we have to aggressively put these programs into place, not wait for permission, and sometimes not even waiting for the funding, doing what we can do to organize people around their needs. Thank you, everyone.